Hello everyone. So today we have a PhD student, Anike Berane. And Anike, could you talk about your PhD research? What is it about? And about your topic.
Yes, my name is Anike and I study at the University of Göttingen at the forestry faculty. And my research is about soil and stem greenhouse gases in temperate forest systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for our listeners, I think it would be interesting to listen for them. As a master's student who does a master's in agricultural science, I know that there are lots of greenhouse gas emitted, like three greenhouses, main greenhouses, methane, N2O, and CO2 from the soil. Could you tell for our listeners in detail, like how does it work and why is that important?
Yes, so I mainly focused my research on forest ecosystems, but the mechanism how this works, it's always the same with the greenhouse gases. So maybe some of our listeners don't know that soils interact with greenhouse gases. So they can actually take up greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, like methane. Most forest soils, they sink for methane, which means they reduce the concentration of methane in the atmosphere. And forest soils do mainly emit nitrous oxide, which is also a really powerful greenhouse gas, as you said before. I think the most famous one is CO2 for most people. But for example, nitrous oxide is about 300 times more powerful than CO2.
Yeah, exactly.
And methane is more than 20 or 28 times more powerful than CO2. So they are really important gases to make research on and to see how we can reduce them, for example, in our atmosphere.
Yeah, I do think it's important to mention because lots of the people are, generally, people from outside the research area, they only think about or they only listen about CO2. But even though there is little amount of methane and N2O, but they are so much higher, like as you said, like 300 times more like greenhouse gas effect. So that's big, first of all, right?
Yeah, definitely, especially from agricultural fields. So I'm not so familiar with this, but the N2O, nitrous oxide peaks can get really high after fertilizing. So this is also a really interesting topic to see how much do we actually need to fertilize or how much is being lost by nitrous oxide because it just gases out of the soil and cannot be taken up by plants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting what you mentioned. Very interesting because I'm also doing my research in soil greenhouse gas, and I have a data on N2O. I'm focusing on N2O, and I do see after the fertilizer, like some of the changes between on N2O emissions. It's really interesting to see, and there are lots to do research, but I don't want to discuss it today. I really want to discuss only about your research. So you said that you were measuring the greenhouse gas stem. And could you tell us more about like forest and stem greenhouse? I never heard of stem greenhouses, just in general. Could you tell us more?
Yeah, I think stem greenhouse gases are still not really known. I think it was first in the end of the 90s that people saw that trees can emit greenhouse gases via their stem. But I must say, it's not a lot. And trees are great because people
I shouldn't cut out my trees.
It's because people always ask me then, so should we cut out all the trees? But no, please don't.
Okay, now I'm a little bit relieved.
Yeah, I think, the greenhouse gases that are emitted via the stem can be an indicator also of the soil because
how is that?
The processes are still not really understood, like how this works. But for example, methane can be produced in lower soil layers. So methane is usually produced where it's like anoxic and wet and you have reduced conditions, and some carbon where the methane can be produced of. So if we all have that in the subsoil, and the roots are there, the gases can travel up through the stem, even if they are maybe dissolved in water or they just diffuse into the stem.
So did I understood it correctly? The stem greenhouse gas not are really coming from stem, they're coming from the soil.
This is not completely proven. It's one theory, like that they are soil derived and that they, travel up, because you can see, definitely relations with, the concentration in deeper soil layers and with the stem. But especially with methane, there's also a different process when you have, for example, like rotting wood inside of, inside of a tree. Methane can also produce there. So methane usually doesn't follow like a really clear pattern. But with N2O, it's different. You can usually see like a gradient that, it's getting less, with tree stem height.
Sorry to interrupt, just to clarify. So you do your research in three greenhouse gases, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and N2O in the forest, you are talking about N2O.
Yeah, I'm at the tree stem, I'm also looking at methane and N2O, but at the moment, mainly N2O. And well, yes, the N2O, I think personally, well, there is like no perfectly proven theory that it's mainly soil derived. So, that it's produced in deeper soil layers and then traveling up through the stem, and it just diffuses out. And, there's still also a lot of research. Is this even relevant or not? Because the concentrations are really low.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's still...
That's so interesting because, from literature, I know, the amount is so low that most of the time they don't consider it.
Yeah.
The N2O.
But there can be, for example, especially with methane, there can be hotspot trees. That can produce a lot of
really?
methane.
Yeah. How is that so?
There was some research done also in my group in Cameroon where they saw that some trees emitted a lot of methane, but it's just really few. If, for example, there is like a hotspot underground and the methane can travel up. So I think it's still important to include them like for our models and our predictions, because like when the climate changes and, for example, we have heavier rainfall and higher temperatures, this can definitely affect also stem emissions. And I think it's good to just get a good overview of all the processes that produce or have like methane uptake or nitrous uptake and production.
Just I go into general questions again. I'm still in the question about, you mentioned the hotspots of like few trees. Like, why few trees? Because you also mentioned that because underground they have more methane hotspots. Or is it also like maybe some of the trees have different factors affecting them, like except the hotspot from the ground soil?
I think it's important to say that greenhouse gases are very heterogeneous in general. Like when I measure at one point the greenhouse gases and you go a few meters away, it can look completely different because there are many factors that intervene. It's the carbon, the nitrogen, water, and especially like micro relief or disturbance can affect it a lot. So we can find hotspots in my theory when there's like old disturbance or soil is compacted or maybe a tree tipped over and there's some old carbon that is being decomposed, and because you also need a carbon source, of course, for
okay. I see that we should also look for the the location and where the tree is located. that's really interesting. And I think for some of the listeners who are going to do their research on forestry, or this would be interesting. Yeah, just look it up. There are many factors to look out. And now I'm coming back to the general question. Now, why? Okay, I should stop right here. About CO2, we didn't talk more about CO2 in the forest. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about CO2 in the forest. How is it? Is it emitted a lot of CO2, or how does it go?
I think for now I mainly focused on methane and nitrous oxide, I must say, but I think the cycling of CO2 is a lot better understood also, because where you have in the forest, you have the uptake from the trees through photosynthesis, but you also have soil and root respiration what emit CO2. But usually in the temperate zone, our forests take up CO2 in general. But, well, I'm just looking at soil and, and the stems, but with the technique I'm using, it's a bit difficult to...
Yeah, well, I will stop you right here, because we will talk about the fieldworks and etc. And there you can talk about your methodology, perhaps. Okay. Yeah, that's why I think our listeners already figured out. Just remember your biology class or environmental sciences class at the school, because we always said trees are good. You should grow more trees. That's the reason, because they take up the CO2. And yeah, now why your research is important? Could you tell us more?
Yeah, maybe I can tell you a little bit more about the focus. So I'm looking at different forest management system. So maybe it's interesting to know some of the forest history in Germany. In the last few years, I think there were this terrible pictures of this Norway spruce stands, old Norway spruce stands. They were all tipped over by wind throw, or they died of drought. And
oh yeah, I heard about them.
Yeah, so Norway spruce was cultivated really heavily in monocultures in Germany, especially after Second World War. And
so what was the reason to put more Norway spruce and it dominated?
The forests were highly reduced, because it was needed for the war, and it was also like a payback or reparation payments to countries. So at that time, people just wanted to reforest really quickly the forest. And they didn't really think about the ecology in the 50s and 60s.
Definitely.
It
was a war.
But more it was after the war, but more in economic reason, or from an economic perspective, and from there it made sense. And it's still something a lot of foresters say, today, that they say, oh, don't blame the foresters from that time because the economic, perspective was the most important. But I think you could already see sometimes in the 70s, 80s and 90s that all the Norway spruces, they were not well suited for the places sometimes where they planted them. And so whenever there are strong winds and storms, they were tipped over, they were thrown. But they replanted it again. And I think now with climate change, you can definitely see that they are not suited, because when they were not tipped over by the wind, they died from drought or then from the bark beetle. And what my research is focusing on is to look for alternatives, I look at a special kind of soil, which is, they are luvisols or stagnant luvisols. So they have wetter conditions.
Yeah, just to specify here, sorry to interrupt again, because some people don't know about luvisols. What is a luvisoil?
Yeah. So this is soils they develop on loess, for example. Loess is a sediment that was blown in in the Ice Age. So it's a sediment, which is...
Yeah, well, we shouldn't go that into detail.
Okay.
I think we already give some hint.
Yeah.
So there are some laws.
No, well, yeah, and it just a fine sediment, and you have clay migration, so you have a clay layer at the bottom, and this clay layer like blocks the water and also helps to develop stagnant conditions. And these soils are especially not suited for Norway spruce, but they were planted on it. And so now I'm looking kind of for alternatives, what you can plant on this soil from a greenhouse gas perspective. So I'm not like a real forester, and I cannot like answer all these forestry questions, but I just look at this greenhouse gas perspective. If we should plant oak or maybe mixed oak, there are definitely tree species that are in discussion because they can root deeper into this kind of soil.
Oh, also the root systems of the trees, right? So as I understood, the clay layer in the bottom, it's so dense that for Norway spruce, like they cannot penetrate that layer.
Exactly.
Is there a tree which can penetrate?
It's hard for a lot of trees because it's really dense, but spruce especially has like very shallow roots. So it's anyway shallow, and with this it can with this clay layer it can definitely not hold. But I think oak trees are some people say that they can root deeper, or they definitely have deeper roots anyway, like a hard root shaped root. I'm
not sure if it's related to your research, because as you said, it's greenhouse gas, but I still want to ask for the climate change, because I know that some trees are more resistant to climate change, like the temperature increase. What trees are like the most climate resistant, and what would be suitable, like from your perspectives?
I think I cannot tell you an answer. I think there's no clear answer about this, but a lot of research that is being done. And in my opinion, there cannot be one tree species that will save us from climate change, but more, like complex systems. I think we have to have multi-layered forests, and so that the trees can, I wouldn't say help each other, but they can root in different depths. And so they can use the water also from different depths. And I think even then, if one tree species fails, there's still other ones. So
diversity provides resistance. I see. But wouldn't that be so cool if we had one tree which could resist everything?
Well, we saw what happened to the Norway spruce if we put it in a monoculture. So true. I think it's not that's true.
And again, you also mentioned the forest management systems. I know only one, like agroforestry, because from agricultural sciences. Any other like forestry managements? Could you maybe tell us briefly about them?
Yes. Well, agroforestry is still agriculture, but forest management system, I think we just talked about them already.
Maybe they are totally different. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a monoculture. Like if you just put Norway spruce, or if you have a diverse forest, this is a different kind of forest system. So forest management system in this way mean how many tree species you put into a forest, or do you actually intervene at all? So I'm also looking at natural regeneration. So what happens when you just leave the forest and do not really intervene a lot?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because in Germany, as far as I know, the forest is intervened by, they are managed by humans, right?
Yes, definitely. Also, maybe you can separate it by different intensities. For example, like if you plant oak trees, like you really have to protect them so they are not eaten up by deer. So you have to fence them. And then you're cutting out other trees sometimes. So this would be really highly managed if you go in, I don't know, every 5 years and take out different trees, so you just have oak. Or if you, for example, you plant oak, but you don't manage it as heavily and allow other trees to grow. So you have a more diverse forest. There would be a different management system. Or if you just leave, the trees that are growing, there are some people in Germany that are really in favor of this system. But I think it has, well, as everything, advantages and disadvantages, because when you are on a spot where there was only Norway spruce, also it will come back, of course. Also other tree species, but we will have a lot of Norway spruce that will grow naturally on its own. So I think, in my opinion, what I like as a way of forest management is also letting it grow naturally, but then be selective of the trees you want to, you want to grow or you want to support in their growing.
Yeah. Well, we're not definitely going deep into this topic because we're talking about greenhouse gas. That's why, as you speak, I see that you have a lot of knowledge about forest, and I believe that this all comes from your own experience, like conducting the measurements or working in the forest. So my question is the fieldwork, again, about the greenhouses. How do you measure them? Like how they are conducted, the field measurements?
So we are working with chamber techniques. I think, how you measure, it's always the same idea. So you're trying to build a system or like a box on the soil where you can measure the concentration over time. And then you can calculate the flux of it. And you can also try to extrapolate it and see which forest management system, in my case, emits how much per month or per year. And it's the same with the stems, actually, but it's a little bit more complicated because you can not just like take a box or a chamber and put it into the soil, but you have to enclose a stem. So I do that with silicone and then with plastic bags and try to make a closed system around the stem.
Also, here, some of our listeners, I know that they are master's students, and for them, maybe it would be interesting to know the struggles about conducting the field measurements.
There is definitely some struggles with working in a forest. I think my biggest struggle is dealing with wild boar or like wild pigs, because I haven't seen them live until now, which is quite good, I think. But they dig out my chambers, so they usually should be permanently installed. But it happens that they dig out my chambers. And also these pigs, they like to rub on trees, so they actually rubbed off the silicone of some of my trees. And this is, some struggles you face when you work in the forest. And of course also the weather. So I'm trying to conduct year-round measurements. And so we also went out in January, and then suddenly it started snowing, and
in January,
it got really cold, but we figured it out.
And also we were talking about field measurements, like you were talking about funny stories on the field, but I'm interested, like how do you decide on where and how to conduct your field measurements? Like, for incoming PhD students, maybe it would be interesting, like how you're, because I had an interview with Ubaida. He's, a PhD student, he's doing his first year, but from a second year PhD student, I really want to know how does it differ, like the independence, because I know that you become more independent, and how does it all go?
Yeah, maybe that's an interesting topic, because also the PhD project I'm doing, it is my own project, so I have my own funding. I'm funded by the Green Foundation in Germany, and I've worked with my supervisors before, so I did my master thesis in the same group, also on greenhouse gases. And then I decided to apply for funding. And so I did actually also, together with my supervisor, decide on the whole design of the study. And I picked out the forest sites. And this is some process that I really like. This is what I really like about my research as well, because, you can think of something like an idea or a design in your office, but when you go to the forest, then it's completely different. So you always have
exactly.
You have to have an idea, but you will never develop an idea and try to find what you expect the forest to be. So it's a complex the process of looking what can I do with it, and looking for scientific questions. So in my first year, I actually spent a lot of time driving around in a forest, looking at the forest and trying to figure out my experimental design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I also know there are things about the peer review and also publishing papers. Yeah, I really want to touch upon these topics. Mm-hmm. I have heard about them, but I really want to know from your perspective, how does it go? The peer review process, and what do you know about the peer review process, and also publishing papers? How difficult it is?
Well, I think it depends also on your co-authors on how long it can take, but also on the journal. Well, I must admit I haven't published anything myself. So I just know it from colleagues and friends. So you need to look up a journal and then look what is their guidelines and follow their guidelines before you hand in a paper. Well, or the process before, of course, how to conduct your study and get a paper or manuscript. And what then? So when you decided, you first need to agree with all your co-authors on what you have written, that you can hand this in. So then you can send it to the editor of the paper, and they look if it fits into the scope of the paper. And then there's different kinds of reviews. It can be completely anonymous, or
is it having peer review as an anonymous? What advantages and what are the disadvantages? Because is it weird to have peer review anonymous, or is it advantageous for the peer reviewer?
I'm actually not completely sure which one is the most common one. I think that you usually see the name of the authors, but an advantage, for example, of a both-sided blind peer review would be that you cannot be biased by the name of the people. Of course, everyone has biases, especially if people say they are not biased. I think they are the most biased.
To reduce the bias.
So because it depends on the name, and you maybe think about something, or if you know the authors and you like them or you don't like them, or there was also studies about if the authors were female or not, they usually have a higher chance to be rejected, because there's of course also a sexist bias.
Yeah. Okay. So, and what I'm asking about this. Okay, we're coming here now about the stress during your PhD. I think the publishing the papers and getting feedbacks from peer reviewers, and also there field work, which you totally have to, or with the help of other people, conduct and choose and do yourself. I do hear a lot of stories, and especially on Twitter, lots of PhD students tweet they are having stress and depression. I just want to know, as an incoming PhD student, how does it build up, and what might stress you out in your PhD?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can first stay with the publishing. Because, I'm not at the process yet of writing my manuscript, because I'm with the fieldwork, which is another stress story. But, when you're about to publish, like you have to write your manuscript, you send it to someone for feedback, to your supervisor, which can be for some people devastating depending on your supervisor, the feedback. And then you have to send it in to the journal. Maybe it's being rejected, but you're having the pressure of your scholarship or your job ending. So you have a lot of pressure because you're also defined by how much you publish or what you publish. And I think this is a lot of pressure, or also the peer review that you get can be pretty bad. Like also on Twitter, you've maybe seen like that this peer review can sometimes be not really nice. So
I've seen that. I've definitely seen, I cannot say very negative. I would say upsetting, like they were very super upset, about their, feedback. Yeah. But I haven't like really go into the detail, but as an incoming PhD student, for me, it's really interesting, like, because I hear like lots of the everywhere, like when I go for a PhD, like a community, they always talk about stress. They always talk about depression. And I'm a future scientist trying to understand, like, how does it build up? What are the factors influencing? And so from what you said, I see like there is a peer review, like you really get negative, like, feedbacks, but how negative it could be.
Oh, well, this, I don't know. I haven't gotten it. So, well, if you look up in Twitter, I think you can find some horrible examples. But I think usually there should be a code, or there is one, of being nice to each other and constructive. But I think, well, some people don't follow this as always. But I think it's not the only thing. I think you also ask about how this stress built up. And I think this is also an important topic because, for example, in Germany, I think the PhD is many times like very free in a way. It's not very structured. So you're kind of like really independent, but it also means you need to structure yourself and your work. And I think this is, for many people, it's really hard because you also, you don't have a limit. You can always work if you want. So, you always feel like you never finish. And I think it can be really stressing out for a lot of people. So I think for me, it's really important to kind of structure myself and set hours where I also don't work. And, well, for me also stressful, of course, is my fieldwork because it's physically exhausting, but it's also a lot of work coordinating it, being responsible for it. And okay, if this doesn't work out, like you don't get the data, and I have to coordinate with my student assistants, and I depend on the weather or on what the pick dates over the weekend on my field sites. And well, there's a lot of, I think you have to get used to that things don't work out as you expected. Yeah.
So like from what you said, is it correct that I understood? You may have plans, but you should be very flexible, that your plans are going to change depending on the weather, depending on your supervisors, or getting a feedback, and also other factors, right?
Yeah, I think that is maybe also the conflict, that at some point you need to plan and structure yourself right, but you always need to revise the structure and plan because it always changes. But if you don't have one, you just get lost and you just do stuff without knowing what you're doing anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a thing. I think we're all going to learn at a certain point, like, as becoming an adult, but in a PhD, like you will have only 3 years because you are funded for 3 years or 4 years, right?
Yes.
And you should definitely master it in 3 years. Wow.
Well, yeah. But like, I think to be realistic, in Germany, at least most people take longer than their funding. I think I also have funding for 3 years. And of course, I'm trying to finish it in 3 years, but I don't know if that will be possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, other question which always bothered me, like, because most of the time they offer like 3 years or 5 years extension. Is it important to have or to apply for a PhD position where they have an extension, like for 4 years or for 5 years? Because when you have PhD, they do have an option like with extension, and they don't have an without extension. So they say, okay, this research is only for 3 years.
Yeah, well, if you have the option to get a job with extension, definitely go for it, I would say, because I'm on a scholarship and I need to write reports every year for the first 2 years. And then, well, I have funding for 2 years and I can extend it 2 times for 6 months. So I can have in total for 3 years. But I think that this kind of scholarships that I'm having are usually used for social scientists, where this is maybe a bit easier to finish this. And this time there's not a lot of natural scientists, but it's also because the funding just concerns my my payment, the money I'm paid, but none of my expenses for my research. So this is, I depend on my group or on my supervisors that they support my research and get funding from elsewhere. So this is, I think, a concept that not for a lot of natural scientists actually works out.
Yeah. I hear that a lot. Like most of the time, like some of my friends, they are really stressed out, not because like, they are really stressed out because of the real things happening with their research. Okay, I do see the source. So it's like to be very disciplined and also be flexible to the changes which are unexpectedly might happen, right? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay. So I think right now, like what you've said, you gave like some general and very useful informations about forest. And I'm sure that some of our listeners who are interested in environmental sciences, forestry, they had a brief introduction, like how the PhD research is going on and also the stress. You're welcome. I tried to cover this.
Yeah, I really hope I could be of help for you. Listeners.
Yes. And now I really want to just ask some of the general questions, make a conclusion. So as we've discussed already about climate change and the forest and the tree species and what's happening with politics, like with Ukraine, Russia, and also like lots of things are happening, and you do see that we depend on capitalism, right? Still, there are still some cars, electric cars, but they're not as huge. Looking at all of this and our development, like current development, are you optimistic about our future?
I must say, I think I'm not really so optimistic. I wish I could be more optimistic.
I wish so too. Like,
yeah.
I'm very pessimistic. Like, I don't want to disappoint people. Like, I'm trying to cheer up other people, but I'm super pessimistic about our future. Yeah.
Well, I think I was also active before in more like political movements or the climate movements, but yeah, for now, like besides my PhD, it's pretty difficult to be engaged in political struggles, I think. And now I want to, just look for me how I can help out with science maybe and make a positive impact. And I must say that at the moment, or like, to be honest, I don't ask myself this question so much about the future because in a way, it scares me. So I kind of avoid it, but I kind of also judge myself for it that I don't look so much into the future.
I feel you because, you know, we know that everything is messed up. We know that there is definitely a higher chance that we cannot make it. And that really stresses you, and that really makes your future like a bit dark and like bizarre. Because our parents, like they really had a different view about the future, and they really like lived up for that, right? And we do see that because we are doing both in environmental sciences, we are measuring greenhouse gas. We are seeing with our own eyes, like how it's all these processes happening, except people who don't believe in climate change, who believe that, I don't know.
Well, they probably don't do environmental science. I think like when
science in general.
Well, yeah, sadly, I think some do, but
yeah, we do. I think it's like how you feel. It's totally relatable, because sometimes I try not to think too much far about the future, but I try to do my best. And I also see that you are doing your research and you are really putting some effort, like to figure out what kind of trees can really reduce greenhouse gas, or like how they will influence the greenhouse gas. I think you're already doing some effort into it, and I appreciate that, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to look into what I can do now, and what I think I'm in a way pessimistic, but also, I don't know. I don't like a way of being like, this nihilistic way of we are gonna die, so nothing matters. I think I really don't like this like attitude. So I don't know. I still think we should all look out for what we can do. But I also think it's not only about individual actions, but that systems and politics need to change, like to have a bigger impact, because I think I don't like to give all the responsibility to all the individuals, but it's like bigger systems that need to change also. I doubt that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, because look at some of the scientists, Einstein, or like some of the other scientists, like only one person who really influenced the people, or whose research we have in environmental sciences. I cannot remember his name, but he measured the CO2 measurements over the time, like for 5 or 8 years, and he really proved that CO2 is due to human impact, and ice cores also. But there weren't like big group of people. There were few groups of people, and as you are like with your group, you are already doing some effort, and I think that's already like I do not like when people just give up easily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, our future is, we don't have future. And then they start to like do all the bad things to the environment, and they don't take responsibility for their actions.
I definitely think people need to or also countries or nations need to take responsibilities for their actions, because it's easy to say, it's not going to be so bad in Germany. But even now you see the impacts of climate change in Germany. But it's obvious that the impacts of climate change will be a lot worse in the global south than in the north, but the north has emitted a lot of CO2. So I think that the global north definitely needs to take responsibility.
That there is also interesting fact that developing countries or third world countries are emitting CO2, but responsible countries or consuming countries for the product from those countries are mostly northern countries.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at it from a historic perspective, not like who emits a lot today, but in the last 150 years, it's definitely the Northern Hemisphere that emitted a lot. And so I like the approach of climate justice, that those countries from the global north should definitely take responsibility.
I don't know if I'm correct, but that's what I think from my own experience, that countries developing like mine, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, or any Central Asian or any developing countries, we look up to developed countries. And if they are taking actions and if they are asking us to take actions, of course we will do the same, because as a developed country, we kind of like have a respect to them, right? We also want to be developed, and in that perspectives, like we look out to US and we look out to Europe. Most of the time, US, because of the TV and they're known for their politics. And but you do see that the US is not like that doing much. And then politics say, look at the US, like they are doing this. That's why we are also doing this. I know that it's not really how the politicians should talk, like they should take their own responsibility for their own countries. But when it comes to example, they gave as an example, like countries in Europe or countries in US, in northern countries. Yeah. But yeah, well, I don't want to go into details with politics. Yeah, I love discussing about politics, but yeah, really. And now we also covered the topic about the stress in PhD. And I just want to know, it will also help me. What always calms you down when you are really stressed out or upset?
What calms me down? I think definitely going for a walk in a forest or reading a book, or actually a combination of both. I really like going in the summer outside and read a book, a good novel, and just like deep dive into some story. This is something that I really like. Or also sports. I think sports are also really important for me to cope with stress. I like to do yoga or go to the gym or just like swimming, walking.
Tennis.
Something like this. We only did that once. I don't know. I don't have a tennis career.
I agree with you totally. Stress, reading, and also walking. Oh, walking is so good.
Well, and sauna. Sauna is great.
Yeah, it's great. And now, just trying to wrap it up everything. What advice would you give to your younger self?
To who?
To your younger self.
To my younger self. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely don't be so harsh on yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As we talked before, discipline is a good thing for your PhD, but still be nice to yourself and allow yourself a break.
Okay. Your younger self, I think, should definitely listen to it. Okay.
I also think so.
What is your favorite thing about science you love the most?
I think, well, I love science because I think I'm a curious person. So it's looking for what is there, what can be discovered and what is not known, and like see how amazing this world is in a way, and feeling like what I do also matters in a way, and I can find out new things. It sometimes feels more like a game than a job, and I really like this. And I also think this is a motivation that keeps me going in science, or why I want to go on in my scientific journey, because I think if you just try to pursue a career in academics for fame and money, it's definitely not the way you should go.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And you're not even paid more.
Yeah, because you're paid not good. And working conditions are hard.
That would be really stupid if you just go to a PhD. Yeah. As a curious person, I want to ask you, how does curiosity feels? How would you explain curiosity and how people develop curiosity?
I don't know how you develop it, but
how does it feel being curious?
I think it's like you're really interested in things, and like sometimes you're getting stuck with something and you just forget the time around you, and you feel like an intrinsic motivation to understand something, or that it makes me like so happy when also sometimes when you're criticized and you notice like, oh my God, I didn't really understand something. So this motivates me to get deeper into this, and it makes me just really happy to understand stuff and find new things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That description really feels like a curiosity.
How does it feel for you now? I'm interested.
It feels curious. So now the last question, where and how can our listeners find you online? Well, I will definitely provide online link to your university account, right? Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I'm actually not so active in social media, but I do use Twitter. And so if anyone would be interested in finding me, you can find me on Twitter. I don't even know my short name there, but with my normal name, you can find me.
Yeah, I have you on my Twitter, and I will provide you. So thank you, our listeners. I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thank you, Anike, for sharing with your experience and lots of the things about your PhD and PhD experience. I definitely think that you could really cover up some of the topics which were in the mind of our listeners. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope I could be of help. And whenever anyone is interested in talking to me or have questions, you can contact me.
Yeah. In the future, I'm really thinking of having a second part. When you finish your PhD, like really talk about the results, because we can not really talk about the results. For now, I understand that. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Bye.